I'm here with Roger Jacobi today, and Roger works for the British Museum and has been working on our cave fossil collection for getting on for the last 40 years. And it's quite easy, Roger, isn't it, to think about the last ice age as being cold all the time. That's not actually the case, is it?
No, it's not, David. There were very long periods when the climate was mild. I think if you imagine a cold day in winter now, that's the average temperature through most of the last ice age. And people would have been perfectly comfortable coming and going to the British Isles.
Yeah. But it's quite sort of interesting that here at the museum we have some examples of fossils from really cold times, such as we've got this tooth here, which is would have come from a woolly mammoth, which would have sort of wandered about on the semi-Arctic sort of tundra type environments, that similar to how you get the environments in Siberia today. Is that right?
Yes, mammoths are very adaptable, and curiously they're here both in warmer and cooler periods. They just lose their woolly coat in the warm periods and grow a longer coat in the cold periods. But there have been really quite major fluctuations in climate through the Pleistocene, and the comment's often made that if you went to Trafalgar Square 120,000 years ago, where Nelson's column is, there would have been hippopotamus. So there have been quite major changes, and then 18,000 years ago, almost the only animal that was about was the musk oxen, which is a high Arctic creature.
And we also have various animals from sort of warmer periods, don't we? And you've got a nice example of one of our fossils there, haven't you?
Well, again, hyenas. This is a skull from Pinhole Cave at Cresswell. Are very adaptable, and I think they only really die out when it becomes extremely cold. And one of the things we've been doing recently is radiocarbon dating hyena bones from a variety of British sites, and they seem to disappear about 28,000 years ago when it really becomes extremely cold and the environment becomes extremely open.
Yeah.
And the biomass, the number of animals about them to feed on, suddenly begins to decrease.
But it's quite incredible to think that there's such an enormous range of animals that lived very much near Manchester as well.
Oh yes, I mean the environment of the last ice age has no modern analogue. It's true for the plant communities, it's true for the animals. So you're getting animals which today you would find in Africa, the hyena, lion, animals which are Arctic like the reindeer, and then animals which are extinct completely like the woolly rhinoceros and the mammoth. It's an environment which is very, very difficult for us to even imagine.
And we have quite a large collection of cave fossils from the last ice age in Manchester. So why is the collection here particularly important? You've done a lot of work on it, haven't you?
Well, one of my interests, I was trained as an archaeologist, and I suppose if I have a speciality it's flints, and I grew very interested, perhaps about 20 years ago, in the archaeology of the last ice age in Britain. And one of the key sites, of course, is Cresswell Crags.
Yeah.
And Cresswell Crags has always had an association with Manchester. The caves were first dug by William Boyd Dawkins, who was here when the museum was part of Owens College, and then Wilfred Jackson, who was keeper of geology in the museum in the 1920s, went on and had a connection with Cresswell Crags. And for that reason, so much of the material from those caves, not just flint tools but the bones as well, have ended up here in the Manchester Museum.
And you've been doing a lot of work over the years on the collection. Can you describe what your work involves?
Initially, it was sorting the material into the different caves to find out what came from which cave, radiocarbon dating to discover when the animals were about, identifications to check that the animals had in fact been correctly named, and then a huge amount of cataloguing. I once worked out that for Pinhole, which is from where this hyena skull comes, and was cave excavated in the 20s, I'd actually spent 6 months in real days just working here cataloguing.
It's a long time, isn't it?
It was.
Yeah. And you've obviously been working at the museum for a long time, nearly 40 years now. Can you describe how the museum's changed over the years and your experiences of the museum?
Oh, yeah. I think it's become much more organised. I remember the first time I came here was in the very early 1970s, and it was to look at Mesolithic flint tools, mainly collected on the moors around Saddleworth. And John Prague, who only left the museum here a couple of years back, was then the keeper of archaeology.
Yeah.
And I remember that to find the flints, we had to go through so many boxes and drawers and cupboards, And we had a little trolley, and we just loaded any flint that looked hopeful onto this trolley. And I then ended up in I think one of the rooms upstairs, working at a table for about 3 days, including a Saturday. John came in on the Saturday to allow me to go on working. But it was a terrific job finding things. And I think the difference I have noticed over the years is everything has become much more organised. It's really become much better curated, much better catalogued. It's much easier to find things than it ever was in the past.
And you were saying that in the past the collection was very disparate. It was spread across the museum in various boxes and in cupboards and things.
It was absolutely everywhere. And then the part of the museum which is demolished now was a whole series of little storerooms. And you went in there and there were shelves which you had to climb around like a monkey trying to get the specimens down from. And everything was absolutely filthy, covered in dust. And the only working space in a lot of these rooms was the floor. And Michael Eager, who was the keeper of geology here in the 1970s and 80s, died only, I think, a couple of years ago, very sadly. He was just amazed when he came into one of these storerooms to find the whole floor covered in rhino bones. And you wonder what on earth I was up to, I think. He didn't grasp that there just was no surface to work on.
Almost as exciting as finding the fossils for the first time.
Yeah, it was actually, yes.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you very much.